talking leadership, seeking to create an environment where people are willing and able, to impact and influence hearts and minds of people that they work with beyond
Absolutely.
just achieving, a particular mission set.
Yep.
That's
So
good
when
fun.
you immediately came to mind when I started thinking about bringing guest authors in when I came to personal power, because I know in our time when we served together, you talked extensively about it, and you delivered with a strong base of personal power as well. When I would see you speak and engage, I know it's something for you. So. Just like everything, I'm going to start out with just the fundamentals. But once again, personal power is basically how you lead and you connect with your people through your personal attributes, your value, belief system, your attitude, beyond just your positional power.
Right.
And I think that's really for a young sailor or a young leader coming in, you're really starting to develop that base of personal power. As you know, right, we all come in with some amount of value and belief system built into us, right? Some of us were brought up good, right? Our mom was raised us well, taught us great stuff. Maybe we had a strong spiritual foundation, and it really sets us on the course. And then the Navy introduces you to the next value and belief system of honor, courage, and commitment.
Core values.
Yes, and the sailor's creed.
Right.
But some sailors come in, right, the value belief system isn't so good.
Right.
They didn't see good things, right? So what we try to do is shape and align them to a positive value and belief system, and we do that through boot camp and then ongoing leadership and education development. So some of these things are taught, but some of them can be learned as well, I would think. So
Sure, and I think that there's there are, depending on where people have come from, and I'm talking about the leaders and then those new folks that are coming in that are responsible for training, has a big impact on how fast they're able to learn the value of these values.
Yes.
And so the core values, honor, courage, and commitment, it seems like everyone would want to have those values because we've been living it, and most of the people in your audience have been living it as well or associated with people who have. But folks who come from a world where things are very out of balance, let's say highly misogynistic or some measure of discrimination, where they were the influencer of that, they don't see the value in the big group growing. So I'm looking forward to this conversation today.
So I mean, it becomes to your point, very important when you're leading diverse workforce, right? So I mean, you can get yourself in a really bad place, or when we talk about these power bases, remember this isn't necessarily how you perceive your own personal power, right? You might think your value belief system is great. It's really about how your audience, your target audience, and those people you're leading really perceives. So I wrote down a couple things here, and kind of want your thoughts on them. But the attributes that come out to me when I think back of all the best leaders, and I would offer, that's one way to kind of gauge personal power. Like when you saw those leaders, whether it's officers, chiefs, maybe second-class petty officers, what were the attributes in those people that were like, man, I want to be like that person, right? Or I'm really drawn to them. So I think they were authentic, right? They were reliable. They were honest. There was a sense of justice or fairness that, they led in a firm but fair way.
Sure.
And they were available and approachable. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely agree. Some of the leaders, and I'll just name them.
Yep.
Michelle Howard had a level of care that was palatable. You could feel her connection to you, whether she was talking to a group of 500 or whether she was talking to a group of 6. She had a way of connecting to you in a personal way that showed her authenticity and her genuine level of care. And I think that is absolutely important when it comes down to the actual personal power. Because personal power, and if you listen to Napoleon Hill, you listen to Eric Thomas or Tony Robbins, whomever, many people talk about personal power. The strongest way to establish it is through authenticity and through a measure of trustworthiness. And so Michelle Howard, I'll also mention, so I had a chief by the name of Fred Hyde. He started off as a first class petty officer, he made chief while I was here. His level of care and his genuine ability to make plain the super complicated things, because he was an expert.
Yes.
Created an environment where his personal power base, from our eyes, was humongous, because it seemed like he just knew everything.
Yes.
And so I think that's another attribute, and that is being an expert in your particular field creates and builds momentum in your personal power base.
Yep. So what about, so one thing I know you talked a lot about too. So you got the values and beliefs, and those ultimately shape an attitude, a personal attitude, right? And then that shapes what you say and what you do reflects that attitude. So obviously, the strong leaders that have high power, they have a very positive attitude, right? So what's your advice on because it's tough to be in the Navy, it's tough to be a naval leader at times. How do you maintain, and what's the importance of having a positive attitude?
Well, first of all, I believe in that old cliche, the attitude determines your altitude. And so when you have a positive attitude, that comes from a measure of belief. And so when you believe and understand the why behind what it is that you're supposed to do within the organization, when you empower those sailors that work alongside with you, and what the why is for them when it comes down to doing the actual work, you create an attitude where you believe that you can overcome pretty much anything. If you believe you can achieve, that belief comes from. Your attitude comes from that measure of belief, and so strengthening that competency within the profession, creating an understanding of the reason that you're doing what you're doing, creates a belief system within the person and within the organization that will then drive the attitude, create an environment of we can absolutely overcome and do anything that we're called upon to do, and that's super important, and it is absolutely positive.
Absolutely. So it's a feedback cycle with this, right? So as you see leaders with positive attributes, it shapes your own personal belief system. So you might hear the mantra, but I think it's very important. This is why modeling is important, right? To model what these things look like in front of people, because then they'll come to believe and value, like, oh, it's important to deliver and lead in that way.
Sure.
Because they're also judging the other way. They see when you have these, you can take all these attributes and do the counter to them too.
Sure.
People that aren't available, people that don't care, they're disinterested, right?
Right.
And like I mentioned, I'll have to follow you in a naval organization because you've got positional power and authority over me. But if you want to build that team or those individuals and get them committed and buy,
Right.
Ready to go to war with you, right? You've heard that. This is the guy I'll go to war with. You're going to have that power base and maintain it.
And it's important for, you mentioned earlier, and I'll just say it again for emphasis, that authenticity is super important. There's a lot of people out there who are the fake collaborators. They're there's a street poet who recently said, I got fake people showing fake love to me straight up to my face.
Yeah.
That's just, there's a lot of fake things out there that we have to be aware of. And so to present yourself just wholly and fully to your sailors, to your peers as well, and to your seniors, creates that environment where they believe and see that your attitude is real. They seek to mimic it because the emulation. If we feel good about seeing sailors emulate us, then we know that we have displayed to them the appropriate power base.
Absolutely. So let's talk about these power bases. Can be, obviously they're built, right? You invest in your own personal power base, right? I mean, we give you some education and training, but you really got to do that. But at the same time, it can be eroded away. So what advice would you offer in this case for chief petty officers? Not necessarily we'll get into protecting your personal power, but
to maintain it.
Kind of those general right? Because we're told a lot as chiefs, right? Kind of ask the chief, right?
Sure. I think one way is to either to get away, from the cliches and the chants, or to live them out without question. And so to say, this is somebody I go to war with, it's sort of cliche, but when you're living in such a way, presenting that level of care we talked about, that authenticity, in such a way where people say, I want to be like him or like her, then we can maintain, that initial power base, because certainly when you have a particular rank or position, you're going to have a measure of personal power instantly just because of the title. We can give a title away, but that doesn't mean anything. It's your actions that creates the environment for people to want to follow you and to emulate what it is that you're doing. So I would say that your approachability is another way. The sincere level of care I talked about, like with Michelle Howard and Fred Hyde, is something that's super duper important. The willingness to collaborate. It's become popular, at least in my circle, to say that I'm an expert in not knowing. And so that means that I'll reveal, my shortcomings and my ideas, and create an environment where you feel comfortable putting in on it, as they would say in the community. So I want, if you don't question my idea, I feel a little bit unstable
Yes.
because I want to be challenged, so we
Yep.
all can fortify that idea, build on it together, and become stronger. So when it comes down to maintaining that power base, I would say your consistency is super important.
Okay. And so during the expert power session I talked about, there's going to be times you just can't know it all. But one of the suggestions I make is, when you don't know it, huddle your team together, right, and learn together, right? So you're not only going to build your expert power in yourself and your team, you're going to strengthen your personal power when you do that, because your people are going to be like, they're going to sense that, and it makes you more approachable.
Absolutely.
You just mentioned something that teased something out. You talked about collaboration. So in future videos, we'll get more into the influence tactics, but remember, your power bases have to be built to enable the influence tactics you're going to select and use. So let's pick rational persuasion, or let's pick an inspirational appeal, or collaboration tactic. If I'm going to come out with an inspirational appeal, right, people will sense that personal power that goes with it, right? So if I'm going to collaborate, but I don't, people don't feel I'm trustworthy,
right,
they're not going to want to collaborate, right? So you can see how those influence tactics are going to be affected by a lack or strength in that personal power base.
Absolutely, and sometimes when it comes down to leadership, and it's tricky, especially for young leaders, but you have to be willing to be transparent to some degree. I happen to have been one of those senior chiefs that had 5 red stripes, and so every time I put on my uniform, the dress uniform, and I saw those stripes, I was reminded of a mistake that I made. But then I was also reminded that I have got to overcome, and so I'll continue to press on and fight on and do my absolute level best, forgetting about the days of trouble.
Yes.
And then when other people who had perhaps had a misstep saw those red stripes, they saw the fact that, oh, by the way, he's the senior chief now, even though that mistake occurred when I was in first class, then they realized, oh, I can too.
Yes.
And so to create an environment where there is some vulnerability increases your personal power pace. It also will increase your street credit, because it'll show that, hey, you can overcome these things as well.
Yep.
And that then becomes an inspiration, that then becomes motivation to other people, and then it also creates that environment where people feel comfortable and in your approachability.
Yes.
And that approachability, again, super important. As we huddle our teams together and we have a conversation, when they realize that you're just seeking to do the best to increase the mission functions and the capability of the team, and perhaps even create a better person, the folks that you're leading,
Yep.
Oh, people will make their way to you
It
in such
unleashes
a way.
power, I'm telling you.
Yes.
Organizational power.
Absolutely.
And remember, we lead up, down, and across. So this attribute, these attributes, and people gauge in your supervisors and your bosses are looking at this.
Right.
Your peers are looking at it, right? Because you're going to have to go to them to collaborate, and you may need to go to them for help. So once again, if they don't see you as honest or reliable, right? During initiation, that's one of the things we teach new chief selects, right? It's not about, hey, we're picking you, well, actually, in some cases, I think we are validating some things, but you're coming into that new professional network as a chief petty officer.
Right.
To be strong in that network, I need to know, is this person reliable? So if I go to you for help, are you reliable? Are you available? Are you honest?
Right.
Are you humble? Right. These are another reason why in the chief's mess, these attributes have to be maintained. They don't just kind of, I made chief now and I don't invest in my personal power base. You got to maintain it, I think, to maintain strong chief's mess network too.
Absolutely. When you make chief, I mean, it's not like you arrive, you strive. So you've been selected. It's not book back down and feet up. It's okay, let me grab some more books so I can increase my knowledge base. And oh, by the way, let me get some new shoes, because now not only am I going to be looked at differently, there are going to be different areas in which I'm going to be walking. And so I need to tread with a measure of confidence, get those new shoes on as well.
Yes.
So I agree.
Okay, and then when you fail in this area, right, when your personal power base is challenged, I want to get into that now, or
Sure.
as you promote, right, as a chief petty officer and above, those failures become not just on yourself, they become very visible,
Right.
and they also reflect organizational personal power, right? Because individuals have personal power, but in many cases organizations do too. So we care about personal power. Why do we care about these high-level failures? Because they reflect on the character of the Navy and the personal power base of the Navy in general.
Absolutely.
As we strive to maintain and build our reputation.
Yeah, and we represent so much more than just we ourselves. Whether it is in the civilian community, it's the uniform within the tribe of tribes, whether it's the chief's mess or the officer community, super important. I worked at the Inspector General, Naval Inspector General, for a tour before I went to the position I retired from, which is Navy Europe, Navy Africa Fleet Master Chief. And what I saw there was when folks have an increase in the perceived power, that creates some risk.
Yes.
And so whether it is the gift giving we talked about earlier,
Yep.
Whether it is believing their own press, this person is so fabulous, so on and so forth, that is very risky. Defending yourself from becoming conceited or that nose up in the air, stiff neck type of leader is important, because sailors see that,
Yes.
and whether it is seniors, peers, or junior sailors, people pick that up quickly.
Yep.
And so through the initiation process, we learn how to defend that. And I think that through our associations with one another, it's important that we consciously do that as well. We have to defend ourselves against the blind spots and barriers of our opportunity to communicate with others.
Absolutely. So as you move up, right? Hey, now new things come in, right? So a couple things you're going to see, right? You're going to get perks that go with position, right? So your salary is going to go up. Maybe you have the opportunity to make bonuses, or in the civilian sector, stock buy-in, or things like this, right? You get the bigger office, you get the parking spot. In Navy speak, you get ratings and titles,
Sure.
right? You get to travel, right? People are going to come to you with gifts, right? At the same time, people want to do things for you, right?
Right.
They want to please, and they not out of a kind of malicious place, but they're going to want to deliver.
Sure.
So you're going to get praise and you get flattery, and people are going to come doing favors, right? So this whole, this is why we talk about ethics and kind of understanding these things, and it's risk management at that point, right? You're introduced to risk. You got a solid, hopefully, foundation of values and beliefs, but as these risks come in, you got to put controls in place. So what are some of the controls that not just chiefs, but sailors should put into place, or anyone in the wardroom thinking about this stuff should do?
I'd say that one super control is to have a mentor that you really trust.
Okay.
And whether that is within your professional field or within your family base, or those things are important to you. Have someone who can just speak straight truth to power and give it to you in a totally unfiltered way. And so I've got probably 6 friends who are free to just tell me exactly what they see as being wrong, as well as I lean on them for support as well. So when you have a strong mentor in place, perhaps someone, while we're talking about being in uniform and leading, who is more senior to us, who has perhaps already been through some of the, oh, by the way, now that you've got some nickname, now you're the MPA instead of just some officer in engineering. Now you're the CMC, now you're the command senior chief, or whatever that position may be. Someone who's already done that, who can help you kind of navigate through some of those waters, because whatever measure of fame and celebrity that you gain in that title or in that nickname in the Navy creates an environment where people can bring you those gifts, where people who want to perform beyond their own capability just to satisfy what they think that you may want them to do. And so not only will they say things they think you want to hear, they'll do whatever it takes to accomplish the mission, which may be outside of the ethical boundaries which we have to influence. And so I'd say the way to kind of mitigate some of that risk is to have a mentor, someone that you can trust. It may even be a group, whether if you're a church person, then it could be in your church group. If you have a family, it could be mother, sister, auntie, cousin, uncle, brother, cousin, wife and them. Your children, perhaps, if they're old enough as you become more senior.
Yes.
My oldest daughter is 27, and she is the truth to power somebody. She and my other daughter, Mahogany, and Alexandria, both, they are, Daddy, I think this is wrong because these things. And so having someone who can speak to you very clearly, very, very helpful. But yes, the network, those individuals create that environment where we can defend ourselves better.
And then you got JAGs, right? You get the lawyers on staff that can help, right?
IG, don't forget about the IG,
right?
great
Chaps.
helpers. Yeah.
So there's a lot of people. I've relied heavily on chaplain, just not to talk through personal, but if I was going through challenges, that's there's a level of confidentiality there that you can't get anywhere else.
And then they're professional counselors, and so they may help us refine our approach.
Yes.
And that's another thing that allows us to kind of spread our power base and to influence the organization better, is that I happen to be a high energy type of speaker, and you are a very intellectual speaker.
Yes.
And so I have to observe you, learn some of those skills, so that when I'm speaking to the team that I'm working with who has your attributes, I can speak their language.
Yes.
As well as kind of using the chaplains and those other folks we talked about, the professional counselors, to help us with that, allows each and every leader to diversify your ability to communicate. Super important.
So I think another thing too is like knowing yourself, right? And that comes with some self-reflection and IDing the risk. So I would often say when I was on active duty, like we're all vulnerable to something. Sure. I'm convinced, right? There's some draws out there. Some people will get vulnerable to money, gambling, alcohol, drugs, sex, power, fame, right? There's always something that if you really are honest with yourself, you'll know that, or maybe it's a combination, right? You start drinking and then the value and belief system changes, right?
Sure.
So I think number one, do you know those things, right? I knew what they were for me. And then once you've identified the risks, how do you put those other controls, right? Hey, how do I have someone come alongside, or how do I have that truth teller that helps me keep myself honest?
Sure.
Obviously, the Navy's going to invest, or organization invest in some amount of ethics, training, and education, right? So, as we moved up in these positions as, working for flag staffs, travel, gifts, all those, how you use those resources you're given to do the job, if they aren't the job, but how you use those things, and how do you use them in a right way and protect yourself is important.
Sure.
And then what do you think about periods of self-reflection? What's your thoughts on what do you do with that?
Well, I'd say, someone once said, and I believe, to thine own self be true. So, as you mentioned, know yourself, absolutely important. One way that I have kind of brought on over the last, maybe decade or so, has been something called mindfulness. So I will take time to practice mindfulness, which is a measure of meditation, to find that quiet, find that peace, know those things that I'm vulnerable to, and ensure that I'm defending myself against them. And then putting people in place or systems in place to help defend me against that. As an example, when I was on board Harry Truman, I had our ASEPO. He would look through our books. It was in our bylaws. You would look through there quarterly, but we were generating money. And so I didn't know a whole lot about the finance piece, and so I would have them look every month or after every beer on the pier event, just to balance me out, because I knew that was a shortfall of my own personal one. And so sometimes it's about reaching out to an organization or somebody different to help balance this out.
Yeah. So like I mentioned before, one of the approaches in writing this guy is at the end of each chapter there's these questions, and they're for that, right? Self-reflection. So like for chapter 5, consider an ethical decision you made at a previous point in your career, and use the questions provided in this chapter to evaluate whether you made the right choice. What would you or should you have done differently? Right. So just there's like 6 or 7 of them, but to your point, making that time, or imagine bringing that into the chief's mess and going, hey, what's a decision I've made that you guys raise an eyebrow?
Sure.
I think that's important too. So
that measure of vulnerability is something that people respect, because they realize then that you don't mind being an expert and not knowing, and then being able to find a solution, and one that you're not so caught up on or connected to, because it's really more about how you come to the decision than the decision, as far as I'm concerned. So if we can all come together, learn together, put in on this particular decision, then all of us have a measure of commitment to it.
Okay. And then remember, for those senior enlisted leaders at Department LCPO, Command Senior Chief, Command Master Chief, Chief of the Boat, working on a flag staff, your bosses and those department heads and COs,
Sure.
you are a source of backup. You're a truth teller to them too, right? So you're in that
Absolutely.
unique position. You owe them that straight up advice. So if you're not giving that and assessing, and giving that watch team backup to your boss,
Sure.
You're failing, I think, to meet a fundamental obligation of that position of being a command senior enlisted.
Sure, and that goes, we're talking very generally about relationships, but relationships at the individual level, at the group level, at the organizational level, extremely important. And so your ability to speak to power has a lot to do with the relationship that you have with that person. So investing in that relationship is important as well.
Got it. So, all right, so let's, a couple of recommendations, right? So obviously you got the Chief Petty Officer's Guide, Chapter 5, you can read in, questions there, but, One of the books I'd recommend too that talks about this, you know, it's an older one, but it's solid, right? How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? Lots of fundamental, you know, just fundamental stuff about looking a person in the eye,
Yeah.
right? Genuinely knowing these people and having a genuine interest in them. These
How
are
to
the kind
shake
of
a
things
hand.
we've talked about.
Yeah.
What kind of things would you recommend? What books have you read that speak? And I will say, this is the power base that most people that are in leadership development and consulting will talk to, right? And that's one point I came up with the model is because, yes, I got it. This is a powerful base, but there are other bases to it.
Sure.
But there's a lot of books, a lot of public speakers talking about this. Which ones come to mind, right?
Well, one thing on this topic, and forgive me for not remembering the author,
Yep.
but Humility is the New Smart. That talks about ways to collaborate.
Okay.
There's and in that book they reference a gentleman by the name of I think it's Ray Dalio.
Okay.
And he has a book that just recently came out called Principles.
Okay.
Principles is a fantastic book that speaks also, you know, to not just principles, but to a means to influence your organization with those solid principles as well. And then lastly, there's a book called Legacy, which a solid book is about this. What they say is the winningest, you know, team since we have been tracking organizational sports. That is the Blackhawks down in I think it's New Zealand.
Okay. Yes.
And the absolute, you know, awesome book that talks again about how to establish relationships, create an environment of trust, and also a measure of accountability from one to another.
Yep. All right. Well, Ray, thanks again for taking some time.
My honor to be here.
This was
Absolutely
great.
my
You
honor.
know, I think it, like I said, it adds a dynamic. I love the conversation. Once again, Chief Petty Officer's Guide, second edition is out. The Petty Officer's Guide will come out in the spring,
Nice.
May time frame. So these discussions will go beyond the Chief's mess at that point. We're just getting into kind of blue gold leadership.
Right.
Remember the Naval Institute Press. You know, all kinds of professional books that are made there, right? Division Officer's Guide, Blue Jackets Manual. All those are to help you become a better leader and manager. So take what you read, take these videos. I want you to learn. I want you to reflect, and then I want you to go out and make a positive difference. We'll see you on the next episode.
All right.